having to deal with people who so violently reject anything other than the official narrative, how do you stand your ground but still be the human you wish to be?
It's a matter of service. You know, that's what brings me the greatest joy, is to have a conversation that brings people to, you know, a greater understanding. And we have to understand that some people are not ready to hear these things. Mm-hmm. And being able to pick and choose, you know, where to invest the energy is very important, because you can like blow a week of like negative thinking because you're interacting with the wrong people. Some people are just, they're not there, you know, they really, really are not ready to hear. And, you know, Foster says something very interesting, something like, you know, if are you willing to hear me out? If I can give you a cogent argument for this, can you give me 20 minutes of your time? What are the chances that you would be willing to hear that? Just something like that. You know, he's basically like weeding out the people that you don't really, that are not going to be receptive to anything, even a hopeful message, right? And Foster, if you're listening, I hope you are. I'm sorry if I misquoted you. It's a brilliant quote, but I get what you're saying. Hopefully I conveyed it. So that's, you know, holding your ground. It's like, you don't have to hold your ground. You can just walk away. It's a big world. You know what I'm saying? You don't have to like sit there, no, you're wrong, and don't come any closer. Just, you know, walk away.
I guess I meant hold your ground in what you believe and not feel like you need to hide what you believe is all I meant. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Oh, no, to hide what, well, there's too much to lose, honestly, at this point, by not saying what you think, you know? Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's so obvious. Like the point is like, you know, I feel like we are on a, you know, a train that's headed for a mountain, right? And we're you know, we're going and we're going to, this is all we should be talking about. I mean, honestly, it's like, do you not see what is going on around you? Can't you see? It's like, and if you just want to sit there and eat your peanuts and read the paper as we're hurtling towards this wall, that's great. But I'm going to go and find someone else and say, hey, do you want to like get to the engineer's compartment so we can steer this the other way? You know, you want to join me? Let's do that. So that makes my life really, really interesting. And I wake up in the morning and I'm like, oh man, like what are the next series of conversations I'm going to have? How do I articulate this point better? What is another way of telling the story? But you read the Marcus Aurelius quote, Ben, which talks about how amazing it is just to be alive. Okay. The flip side to that is, yeah, this is great, but it's going to end. I need to protect this amazing experience of being a human being on this planet, of breathing and listening and hearing and seeing. And it's going to end, and we have to prolong this experience as long as possible. All of a sudden we get derailed into, you know, protection and you know, holding our ground and, you know, outmaneuvering other people for a better experience. And what I wanted to say here, and this is why that chapter is so important, the reason why I am, you know, completely, I feel, you know, I don't want to say, I feel very powerful. And what I believe is that I'm certain that we reincarnate. I mean, there's too much evidence of this, and that's what I explore in that chapter, is the evidence for it, and coming at it from an anesthesiologist that's like watching someone go into some place that we have no concept of where they are, and they come back, and it's very, very similar to, and it offers a great environment to explore these ideas. And here's what I would suggest to both of you, and you probably know this already, is that, you know, look, I think there's a cabal, you know, I think that, you know, we're being manipulated. We have been for centuries. And the big difference between those guys or women who are pulling the strings and us is that they know that this is just the one chapter in an infinitely long book. And so they're willing to make, you know, sacrifices, and, you know, they've seen the long picture, and they know how to control us because we are so quick to believe that this chapter is the whole thing, you know, like once we know, once we can convince the population that when they die, they're done, we can control them like, sheep, if you don't mind me using the language, I want to say that word,
Well, I would love
cattle,
to.
cattle.
I would
Yeah.
love to dive deep more into your thoughts on reincarnation, because I started off being raised kind of Baptist and had my own sort of journey, was sort of agnostic for a large part of my life, and now I'm in the same boat. But I've found a similar belief through a lot of, honestly, I used a very scientific approach to where I was looking at Dr. Ian Stevenson at University of Virginia, Department of Parapsychology. I was looking at people in your field, anesthesiologists, near-death experiencers, and really trying to approach it like an investigative journalist or a lawyer arguing a case, and looking at all these case studies and meta-analysis and going, there's so much overwhelming evidence of people who are pronounced brain dead, and then talking about these out-of-body experiences and being able to recall vivid, specific details when they're supposedly brain dead of people next door, or young kids discussing past lives of World War II pilots and then knowing specific details of the boat they're on, the plane they're on, and where they're shot down over Japan, and then being able to go to the specific spot in the Japanese Sea and see the crash and meet the family and know specific nuanced details about, oh, he used to do these certain mannerisms, and he knew this certain specific spot where he had these things. And it was just, it's a major breakthrough, but I think a critical component on with great power comes great responsibility, right? And if you know these great sort of powerful, ancient, esoteric sort of truths, you can also use them as a weapon. You can weaponize them too, as you're kind of saying, where you can have a large majority of people to believe a very fear-based paradigm, a very dogmatic, fearful paradigm, because it all goes back to why use fear for anything? It's easier to make people consume more, to be easily more controlled, but hitting on when we first started on in this conversation, death, this idea is the greatest fear for everyone. And this is supposedly the great secret that the psychedelics and the Eleusinian mysteries, it all goes back to this, the Egyptians, weighing your heart compared to a feather, all these ideas of learning. If you can learn the great secret of not being afraid of death and knowing really what you are, and having that experience of basically pseudo death, ego death, and then being able to live the rest of your life knowing that, you're golden. It's awesome. I mean, I worked with the guy when I was in finance who had a serious heart attack. He came back to work the next day. He was walking on cloud nine. He was hugging everyone. He was a new person. He was the most complimentary, nice guy he'd ever been. And it was amazing. I was like, he just had a near-death experience. And I was like, he realized something. He found out something. He knows now not to be afraid. It was this, I felt intuitively like, wow, man, he got a glimpse before, the real transition. But please continue. But how did your journey? I'm curious with anesthesiology. That must have been really interesting seeing this so firsthand in the operating room. Was it right away, or how did you come to this conclusion?
Well, Gordon, that was amazing. I'm sorry to say that you were muted the whole time. So
I looked down.
Yeah, that was really. Look, Ian Stevenson. That's exactly it. And so here's the thing, guys, is everything you quoted is spot on, right? I mean, we have the proof, it's there. Why aren't we looking at it? And in the operating room, for example, here's what's really amazing about anesthesia. These are some of the oldest medicines that we use, not ether, but anesthetic gases like sevoflurane, isoflurane, all of these gaseous molecules. Now, if I gave you, one of these gases, like sevoflurane, 1 part per 50 in your air mixture, you're going down, and you're gonna be unconscious as long as that mixture is being inhaled and exhaled in your system. There's no way that you're going. There's situations where people are aware, but those are extremely rare and not at the level I'm talking about. Here's what's so fascinating is we have no idea how it works. No idea. 174 years later, we don't know how these gases work. And mind you, these are extremely simple molecules. These are, hydrocarbons with a few halogens. That means, chloride and fluorine. It's a gas. It's if you look at a molecule of an antihypertensive drug, it is huge, a huge number of atoms and molecules with these gases, they're tiny, they're simple. Why don't we know how they work? And here's the thing, right? This is where we have to use a little bit of wisdom and intuition. Okay, what does it mean to know how something works? This is fascinating because it goes back to the beginning of our conversation. Like, how do we know what we know?
Mm-hmm.
When we say we know how something works in medicine, what does that mean? What that means is that we know what the molecule of the medicine looks like, which molecules it interacts with, and what those molecules, now modified by my molecule, what it does. And molecule after molecule, we trace a chain of molecular interaction that results in something molecularly happening. Everything is based on this philosophical aspect called materialism. Basically, matter is everything. Even the awareness of matter is a product of matter interacting with itself. That is the Western model of medicine. It's like, show me the molecules, you identify them, now you know how it works, right? So if we consider the idea of anesthesia, for example, and say, okay, so where, how is it causing people to go unconscious? And you look at where, the gas is interacting with our body in terms of molecular interactions, it's interacting with a ton of stuff. I mean, it's not one thing. It is affecting everything. It's, affecting lipid membranes and protein synthesis and, DNA and, all of these things. And it's sort of like a ubiquitous interactive field it has with your body. It's like, you mean all of these things are involved in awareness? Really? That can't be. So a more appropriate way, when you say, well, that can't be, there must be one of those things must be the thing, right? So let's assume that there was one thing. And here's what's interesting. And I know that I talk a lot, so anytime you want to say something, please interject. We know from functional MRI studies, PET scans, like where is the blood going when you're aware? Like what is active in your brain?
Mm-hmm.
And we have those pathways mapped out, the reticular activating system and other parts of your, frontal cortex, whatever they are, we know what they are. So what does that mean? That's what's aware, those few structures in the brain, that's the awake part, and the rest of us is asleep or unconscious? Okay. So let's assume that awareness resides in those specific compartments of our brain and brain stem. Let's look a little more closely. What's going on in them? When they're active, what makes them active? Well, they're active because you have conduction happening in the neurons that make up those particular components of your brain. Okay, so the neurons now, they're active. The molecules that are in the nerve cells that are now aware, and if you keep boiling it down, you're going to get to smaller and smaller molecules, like, the actual components of the membrane that allow the transmission of electricity down the membrane to make it active. So where then is the part that's aware? So here's the thing, guys, like when you start looking, like we have predetermined what our solution will look like because we're looking for molecules. That's the only thing you're going to find if you're looking for a molecule, right? Mm-hmm. How can there be a molecule that represents this multisensorial, experience we're having? It's impossible. Like it doesn't make any sense that we're going to get to the answer, right? Do you follow me here?
Yeah,
I do. Make sure y'all head over to benjosephstewart.com, become a member. You'll have access to the growing library of deeper dives where I talk about all the stuff that I really can't talk about on YouTube. Make sure you get involved in the Discord chat. That's where a lot of the conversation is happening, talking about new theories, being able to interweave into the greater conversation that is how we awaken infinity. That's our highest potential. And I just want to remind you, you are the most powerful technology ever known to creation. Wield it like an artist with a conscience.